in your own words, outline your leadership experiences in interagency environments.
So I've been fortunate enough to have several opportunities to do that. One of the first would have been my time at the then Australian Bureau of Criminal Intelligence back in 1997, where I had an opportunity to actually lead the Bureau's Olympics project. And basically that was around focusing on the provision of strategic criminal intelligence to complement the national security intelligence that was coming in from ASIO to support games decision planners in relation to responding to criminal and other threats likely to impact on the game. So that was a broad, if you like, Australian law enforcement coming together. I had people working from all over Australia as part of our team, but working across a range of disciplines as well, but also with the national security agencies as well. You know, my time in East Timor, as we were just speaking about, that provided me an opportunity to work with a whole of government perspective from an embassy position, but also then to look at what was happening on the ground in relation to Australia's bilateral efforts, but also our time and our large contribution to the UN mission that was in country at that time as well. And when I arrived in Timor in early 2009, the UN still had primacy for policing, so they were undertaking the policing functions as we were continuing to collectively work with the Timorese in relation to developing their professionalism around policing and law enforcement and rule of law and so forth. And probably one of my most recent experiences in a much larger setting was my deployment to Liberia with the United Nations, and I had the privilege to work in the UN as its police commissioner over there, working with, in the police component, 40 different contributing countries that made up the almost 1,800 strong police component. And so working with countries that I'd never worked with previously and getting an understanding as to their professional and personal competence and those sorts of things, and how we could come together in a single task of around the provision of capacity building, development and executive policing support to our national counterparts in really trying to strengthen rule of law, but also having key roles in the protection of civilians and those sorts of things, and really getting to understand you know, how big our globe is, but how small it can be as well in when we're working together on you know, key projects and key deliverables that we were. So as I said, I was very privileged to be able to be part of something that was, you know, certainly well beyond my scope when growing up as a boy in a small town in Burua, not too far from here, and to then all having a police component larger than the town I actually grew up in was just a very awesome experience.
Yeah, that is incredible. Like, I'll be honest, I'm looking forward to talking to you because there's not too much out there about, especially about yourself and especially about your role in Liberia. So what previous, like you mentioned your interagency experiences, but what other experience did you bring to these roles and how did it enable you in your leadership?
I likened it to one of the things. I joined the police as a 19-year-old and I thought at the time that I had an old head on young shoulders, and one of the things that I think was key to this was really I wanted to be able to make a difference. No matter what that difference was, it was something that was a core principle, if you like, that I wanted to be able to come in and just make a difference in relation to these sorts of things. So in doing that as a police officer, in that general service to the community and really in partnership with the community and trying to solve problems, and also, you know, to where there had been wrong, to try and right those wrongs, but to also do that in a compassionate way and within the scope of, you know, the powers and the laws that we had available to us. So I think this was one of the key reasons or experiences that I had. As time went on, I think my ability to work with others. I saw that I had very good people skills, but I was also attuned with an emotional intelligence that understood not only the impact it was having on me, but the impact I was having on others, and how I was able to use people's strengths and how to actually focus on people's areas of improvement that we could actually work together on these particular things. So I think those sorts of things were really key. The ability to communicate was also another a key challenge, and it was a key attribute, but also a key challenge, is particularly when you're working in what was an English-speaking mission in Liberia with the UN, but believe it or not, apparently Australians, we have an accent, and in trying to communicate with many people that your message, it was important your message was clear and it was understood. It can be difficult when you're trying to reach almost 1,800 people so that they all understood the mission, they all understood their part in it. And I guess if it was what I saw prior to going into Liberia was going to be one of my biggest challenges, is making sure that we're all on the same page and that I had a communication style that I could still be persuasive and shape and influence outcomes at the very senior levels of the mission and across government with our host counterparts, but also be able to speak to all the men and women that were in my police component, and that we had a relationship and it was clear and understood, even those that English was a second or third language for them as well. So I think taking just the time to be present as well, I think they were one of the things as well, that you took time out of your day to actually spend time with others just to check in as to how they were going. Particularly in Liberia it was important because we had Ebola in the country for 30 of the months, of the 36 months that I was deployed there. So we were operating in an environment similar to a pandemic that we're seeing now that had significant impacts on the country, but also for those that were serving there as well, because we were dealing with misinformation, panic, fear, rumour. And I think another one of those strengths is trying to actually be truth-setting, to actually be courageous enough to speak the truth and tell people what you could and couldn't do, noting that we were there as peacekeepers, and typically we didn't run from trouble, we didn't run from adversity, and whilst this was unprecedented in a peacekeeping mission, it was about also stepping up and rolling the sleeves up as well and showing that you are part of this as well. You're not just hiding away or shying away from your responsibilities, that you were very much part of the group effort that was going on. So leading from the front was also really important as well, that you stepped up when you needed to, so that you were role modelling the behaviours, the expectations that was required of us in a real time of need as we stood steadfast beside our national counterparts.
If you don't mind, I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into what you were mentioning about your ability to work with others, your people skills. Do you have any observations about how you grew those skills or how you developed those skills? So one of the main aims of the project is for future interagency leaders. So yeah, how did you, any practical advice for people themselves to grow that ability?
Yeah, this is one of the challenges I think that comes with this, because rather than just a professional relationship, I saw that I had to actually personalise some of these relationships as well. So investing time and energy into this so that you really did build relationships of trust, so that you could have those strong conversations when you needed to, but the strength of the relationship would get you over some of the challenge or the courageous conversation that you had to have, because at times you were a bearer of bad news. So it was really important that the strength of the relationship, the ability to be able to be frank, to be honest, and to actually say at times things that needed to be said as opposed to things they wanted to hear. And I found this at times where I've had to, particularly in Liberia, where I had to speak with heads of agencies and tell them that things weren't going well. And perhaps their leadership or the manner in which they were doing things was a contributing factor, a large contributing factor to perhaps our inability to collaborate, our inability to deliver, or the fact that they were actually causing or stalling progress because of their behaviours and conduct, which wasn't necessarily, practising good leadership. So I think that's what I try to do. I've tried to actually look at ways in which I can not only have a relationship professionally, because we have things in common, and often that's easy if you're working in policing. We have a brotherhood, a sisterhood, because of our natural calling, as similar as you would with defence. and other occupations. So I think we had a common understanding and we were able to build on that, and it was just a lot of time. You had to invest time and energy into those relationships so that it was something that wasn't superficial. And that meant at times, you know, if you're wanting to get, you have to give. So in sharing, a little bit of the storytelling, and sometimes, you know, doing this in a social setting as well, so that you actually drop the professional barriers and those sorts of things, so that you were able to talk more openly about families and those sorts of things, which I found important, particularly when I was deployed to Liberia, because, you know, I was there unaccompanied, and it was nice to know that there's a human side to Greg, not just I'm the police commissioner, that it's Greg Hinds, and I actually do have a life outside of, you know, wearing the uniform often many days a week, that I do have issues with family, we do have issues at home, those sorts of things. And so, you know, there's a common bond around sharing and storytelling, which was also important as well, about giving, and you also usually got a lot from those interactions as well.
That's really good to hear. And if I may just, what outcomes did you get from your courageous conversations?
Change.
Yeah?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I also found I had to pick the environment and the timing in which I did it. So this was very much when I had to have some of these strong conversations. I made sure that it was one-on-one. You know, I didn't want to be seen to be belittling in front of command structures, because it was really important that I could take them into my confidence in relation to this when I had to address these sorts of issues, and whether that meant one-on-one in their office, one-on-one over an evening meal, those sorts of things, where, as I said, it was part of that investing into the relationship so that you could talk about anything. Didn't matter whether you were talking about kids, didn't matter whether you were talking about there's challenges in relation to the integrity, or there's been an operational outcome that hasn't gone so well, their response hasn't been so professional, their role needed to change, or they need to actually do something. So making sure that the environment was right, but also that we set the tone as well, that this was more about a peer relationship than it was a teacher-student relationship as well. I very much did this as we are peers, we are brothers and sisters in the same journey here, and the reason I'm saying what I'm saying is because I have a genuine interest in improvement. Australia doesn't have any investment in what comes out of here. The UN doesn't have any real investment. We just want to make sure at the end of the day that we're doing the best that we can for you, either as a collective or in some cases as an individual, in trying to make sure that they were well placed to actually do what they should have been doing.
Thank you for letting me explore that, and it touches a little bit on the next question, how you developed and articulated your leadership vision specifically in Liberia.
So in Liberia, I think this was one of the things that when I first went there, because I hadn't worked in the UN previously, so when I went to Liberia and I was going in as its police commissioner, I mean, there was concerns about what am I going to be faced with when I get there, having never worked. Whilst I saw it from the periphery as an outsider in Timor-Leste, I hadn't actually participated in the UN. And for me, what was really going to be fundamental is stock taking in relation to where are we at. When I was going into Liberia, there had been continued peace for 10 years. So what did that mean? And then secondly, it was going to be, where do we need to go and what's the longer term plan? And some of my early observations was that whilst there had been some change, in many ways in the 10 years I saw we had done 1 year 10 times. And so for me it was going to be really critical to have a strategic plan. What is the end state? And then how do we work towards that? So for me it was really about reorientating a large workforce so that we had a common goal, that we were able to unify effort, and that everyone knew the journey that they were going to be on and what their part was in that. And so that was really important for me to get there early, because I saw that we were quite fractured and we were quite unstructured in our approach. And the benchmarking that had happened just prior to me getting there really was pointing a finger at the national counterparts. For me, I saw it through the lens of coming in fresh, going, we need to change. If we're going to continue to do this, we're going to get the same results. We've seen that over the past 10 years. So we need to reinvent what we're doing, and we need to make sure that we've got national buy-in and we've got national leadership. If we don't have commitment to the journey by our counterparts, we are not going to go anywhere on this journey. So it was really, really important that we actually devised a cohesive strategy that actually saw our national counterparts wanting to take a lead in their own development, in their own capacity building, their own end state. Mm-hmm. And then it was really incumbent upon us, how do we best equip, capacitate, help them on that journey, and what can I do to make sure that we actually got the right people with the right skills in the right place at the right time to help them on this journey. And with all the challenges that were facing us, how do we grip this up so that we can make it meaningful, that we can actually look to achieve it as well. So we have to make sure that we've got an ability to have several key priorities that's agreed across government, across the UN, and well known and defined within the police component. So we had an area of focus and we had an area of attention, and we had a longer term strategy to achieve our goals, so that we could start also looking at our measures of success as well as monitoring the outcomes along the way.
Yeah. And how long did that process take you?
So the good thing was the stock take had happened just prior to me getting there. So I was fortunate that had happened at the end of 2013. So in 2014, when I arrived in the January and had an opportunity to read the report prior to my arrival, I had a good sense of what I wanted to see, mm-hmm. but I needed to take my police component with me. And so I had to take them on a journey of basically introspection in relation to what we had done and the manner in which we had been doing it, for them to reorientate and change. The trouble with that is by the end of March, having arrived there early January, Ebola had already came into the country. So it was already starting to have an effect upon what are we going to do. So there were some external drivers in relation to rethinking what we were going to do, but even what that meant for the peacekeeping mission as well. There was a lot of concerns around whether the peacekeeping mission would even stay in the country at that particular time. So as part of all those sorts of things, it probably took until the June to have a really good joint strategic framework around what we're going to do, which was in agreement with our national partners. And it was something that was clearly articulated, but we had to continually reorientate that, because as the Ebola got worse, we had to stop our capacity building and development activities largely to support our national counterparts on the front line by training them around the transmission of Ebola, how to keep themselves safe. By keeping themselves safe, they kept us safe at the same time. And there was some real challenges in the communities where they didn't believe government messaging that Ebola was real. So we had to reorientate a lot of our community policing and community engagement activities, where we were out actually standing alongside our counterparts, whether it be through immigration or police, in messaging Ebola is real, and these are the steps you need to take to safeguard yourselves in relation to this, because there was a number of unsafe practices, burials and so forth, that actually exacerbated the problem locally. So we had to reorientate that, because the mission dictated that we really need to support the government's priorities of around security, mm-hmm. and also health and humanitarian efforts, and also their information management. And it wasn't until such time as probably early in 2015 to mid-2015 that we were able to turn around and undertake some self-assessment programs with our national counterparts, reorientate our capacity building and development priorities, and really set a longer term course for exit, because our We were also able to negotiate with the UN Security Council and the pen holder, who was the US, to actually have a much more clear and defined mandate and start looking at an end date for when UNMIL would depart the country, so that we could break a dependency cycle that was starting to exist with our national counterparts, but also it allowed us to have a very clear exit strategy in mind that we all collectively, the government of Liberia, but also the United Nations family, could work towards as part of what priorities do we need to have in place so that we have rule of law, so that we have functioning criminal justice systems in place, that there is an ability to disperse those services across the country, and that it was being maintained so that we could safely exit the country.
You mentioned it, what success looks like, and you've mentioned a number of the factors that influenced and some of the broader strategic outcomes. Personally, what do you think from your leadership period success looked like?
It's hard to say, because for me, I was just hoping that as part of our legacy, part of my legacy as a police commissioner, that I could look back and say, you know what, we did everything we possibly could, given the circumstances, and we were able to successfully deliver on our mandate. And our mandate was really turning around and focusing on what we saw as those core building blocks, if you like, of what is a functioning police force look like. And so that was around making sure not only the individual, but the institution had a number of key functions and over here key skills and attributes, that they operated with integrity. You know, that we were looking, if you like, there was less breaches of human rights, that they were doing things with integrity, that there was less complaints about their interactions, that there was a relationship of trust built with communities, because communities were very much part of the problem-solving processes as well. And so, you know, really the focus is around investigations, management, leadership, also making sure that there was integrity, so professional standards. And I think for us also was really looking at, in the absence of a legislative framework for these national counterparts, that we're able to leave them with a Police Act and an Immigration Act before we left, and a whole range of governance that helped them do their work, so that their institution was much stronger, but also their individuals were better equipped and capacitated to do the role that they had, notwithstanding that they weren't Gucci police forces. We were talking about people that didn't have fuel, that didn't have vehicles, that didn't have pens, that didn't have paper. So we had to look at more basic systems, practices and procedures that they could sophisticate with time as technology improved in the country and their circumstances allowed. So it was really making sure that we were fit for purpose in relation to those sorts of things. And I think success for me was really, it'll be judged by others, but it was more about, when we leave, will the country slip into conflict? Or has the building blocks and the foundations been set that they will continue along a path of recovery and state building? And whilst they might slip off the path occasionally, they don't slip back into conflict. And I think, you know, evidence has shown that the framework that we had in place has really been able to set Liberia up for ongoing improvements. They haven't slipped. There's been a number of successive elections that have occurred there with positive results, and you know, I wish them well on their ongoing recovery. But now we really do see the peacekeeping, the peacemaking, the peacekeeping, and now the state building has really had a number of clear cycles, if you like, in relation to the UN presence in Liberia, working with our international partners as well. But now it allows all those other agencies to come in, because there is a permissive setting for them to help Liberia and Liberians mature and grow and reach its full potential.
And I think that connects in with what you were saying. Your kind of philosophy is to make a difference. That seems to be a common theme throughout many of your actions and your communications and the relationships that you build. So it's incredible to hear. And especially the building block concept, I think, is really, like you mentioned, is that we continue to support and continue to build on what others have done. So, yeah.
It would have been good to have been there early on in the mission so that you could really set those building blocks, because, I inherited a situation 10 years on. So it would have been nice to be able to be in earlier, where perhaps we put more thought into what are the strategic building blocks that we need to set early, so that we actually have a plan of 10 to 15 years, as opposed to what's the mandate for this 12 months? Mm-hmm. And then what's the mandate for this 12 months? It would have been nice to say, in the first 5 years, this is what we need to achieve. And that might have been, going through the DDRR processes. It might have been turning around and looking at accreditation. Mm-hmm. It might have been looking at, okay, how do we develop capacity for the training academies, and making sure that we are giving them fit for purpose training at that foundational level and putting everyone through those. What did the recruitment look like? How do we decentralise? How do we look to equip and capacitate? What are those priorities? If we had gripped up those priorities at the outset, we might have seen more measurable and more timely interventions and improvements, notwithstanding the other external drivers that came towards the end of the mission around, almost 3 years of Ebola, and just the impact that had on all fabric of life and all industry and sectors, and nearly saw a collapse of security, because it had such an impact on the country and spread so quickly. Ebola had never been in capital cities before, so to just see the way it affected and just the responses to that was quite shocking and devastating at the time.
Do you have any observations from that period that you'd like to share about, in terms of your role as a leader, what you took away from that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the things that really resonated with me was, typically for police, we're running towards the trouble. Mm-hmm. We're running towards dangers. Our role is also, when we get to somewhere, we're about trying to de-escalate. And so one of these is like, well, how do you be cool, calm and collected in these times when there's real pressure, when there's real anxiety, and there's crises and uncertainty happening around you. So I think these are the times where you need to show some strong leadership, and perhaps leaving the office and being outside with your people, spending time with the leaders of your national counterparts, and making sure that you are doing the advocacy, that you are making the leadership, that you are championing, that you are demonstrating, that you are role modelling the expectations you have of others, but at the same time cementing that credibility and trust and respect that, one, you know your stuff, and two, that is really important that you've actually got strong leaders in these times of crises who are able to help navigate and able to actually keep people still aligned, focused to the journey that you're on, but also taking time out to make sure that people are okay, that their health, their well-being is actually in check, that they are still remaining connected to families, because that's really important that we have our support mechanisms in place, but also to reaffirm just how important their role is in the collective of what we're trying to do here, and just how important it was, not just across the capital, but travelling to regions and very remote locations and making sure that your people are okay, and just spending time with them, I think really in a lot of ways turned it around, because it just weren't someone who was commanding from afar. You were very much a commissioner amongst the people who were who actually was within reach, that you could have a conversation to, that did say hello to, those sorts of things. I think that personal touch really resonated for many, because it was a little bit unheard of across many of the policing cultures that were part of UNMIL's policing component.
And especially, like you mentioned, in such a challenging environment as well. And I think just another example of the people skills that you've been talking about. So During the initial period of your leadership in Liberia, what were some of your top priorities and some of the challenges you faced? Noting that you mentioned there was 40 contributing countries. I appreciate, any guidance about how to deal with that, so yeah.
Yeah, so I think, as I said, the real thing for me was about how do I make sure that we're all marching in the same direction, and how do we make sure that everyone really understands their role and their function. How do I also make it understand that this isn't a holiday? How do I turn this into a really high-performing, high-functioning police component that we are making a difference? Because we only have a short period of time, and really what it does our personal legacies want to be. So when you leave the mission, what does it hope that others are saying about you? And so trying to shape and influence people's thinking about those sorts of things, and which was really important for me then to have a single vision, a single mission, and a strategic plan about how we were going to achieve this, making sure that we didn't promise the world. So it was like really trying to manage expectations around perhaps under-promising and over-delivering in what we were trying to do, and trying to make sure that we really did identify the key priorities, those key building blocks that we had to cement and put in place across the institutions and across the individuals that were agreed to by our national counterparts, because that's where they saw their gaps. And so it was really important to get them on our journey so that we can best help them by them helping us. And so we needed to really make sure that it was a relationship of trust, but it was cohesive in our approach, that we invested oversight mechanisms to make sure that we're on the right tracks as well. It was really important to do that. But also really important as well that when there was opportunities, particularly around quick impact projects, so these were small up to $50,000 projects, that if there was areas of focus that we were supporting, that we could turn around and successfully bid against all my other priorities to help, for example, the professional standards, so that they could have motorbikes, so that they could go out and interview people that had made complaints about policing misconduct and those sorts of things, that we were really honest about strengthening the integrity of the institution and trying to build strength in community relationships. So, we're also able to successfully build around strengthening border security and community policing by getting a $1.5 million funding from the UN, which hadn't been done previously, because that typically the peacekeeping mission wasn't given separate funding to deliver on capacity building, but we were able to bid for that, and we achieved it. And so we were able to put some really major projects in here and not looking to others to invest into our priorities. I think one of the other things that I did early on as well, when this is a partnered approach. So the UN can't do this on its own, and we only have a limited time in country. And how do you manage the face fatigue? Whilst there was nearly 1,800 people, every other week I had new people coming into mission. So people were going, new people were coming. How do I reorientate them to the expectations? So we really spent a lot of time on getting our induction training right, that when people come into mission, that they understood what the police component was doing, what their expectations were. And for every time, if I was in country, I actually attended every induction as well, so that people got a chance to, one, see their commissioner, two, hear firsthand what my priorities were and what part they played in those priorities as well. So it was really important to reaffirm what those goals were, but also for them to have an understanding as to my expectations and just the key role that we all played as part of that. And it was a privilege to represent our own countries in serving in Liberia as part of a much larger entity, and trying to help people who had gone through conflict, and many of them had gone through conflict themselves and had peacekeeping missions. So it was a chance to pay it forward as well, that they had been the recipients of peacekeeping effort. So they were the real key things that we try to put in place. Clear plan, clear goals, monitoring and evaluation systems, some really, really good work with setting up appropriate committees that were driven around outcomes, and having relationships in place that we were able to make sure that there was strength, there was confidence in what we were doing, there was trust in what we were doing, and everyone was on the same page around what we were delivering, and using our international community to invest into that as well. And because it was such a large capacity building and development pie, looking at complementary effort as to how do we bring the international community as part of this. Well, often we didn't have funding, they had funding but didn't have resources. So how could we actually look to be the capability or force multiplier effect in a number of these environments that we could look to do that, and as part of making sure that when we had the effort we were able to focus on those priorities, and then as we're getting towards the end of the mission, looking at, well, what was going to be those bilateral activities longer term, so that we could set up arrangements so that parts of it would still be supported in the absence of the UN, because we were able to transition from a lot of us doing the heavy lifting to a number of the other international community and NGOs coming in and supporting key areas of focus still.
You did mention it, Greg, about developing effective relationships, but really like to hear any additional thoughts about how you built community relationships, the ones that you just mentioned.
One of the awesome things about being the police commissioner is, like, I almost had a helicopter at my disposal. So the ability to get out of country, get out of the capital Monrovia, and spend time with my people in counties was a really important thing to do. And because we were held in high regard, the UN, because of what we had done previously, you know, I guess those before me had already set up a space around the brand of the UN, and particularly the brand of the UN police as well. So I was able to leverage off that. The fact that typically in many societies, police are used to working in communities. It was easy for us to able to transition that role into, if you like, part of that partnered approach with our national counterparts. Different for them because very much it was a militaristic style of policing. And over time we were able to show that the benefits of a community policing partnership in trying to make sure that those issues in communities, that there was early warnings in relation to issues, challenges, threats that were going on. So there was a number of committees that were formed around county security councils, which made sure that community representatives were part of the decision making, part of the problem solving with other government actors as well, so that we were able to bring community leaders but also community spokesmen into a forum that be able to do that. And also when I travelled, I typically spent time that I would also do some community halls or go and speak with the communities about what we were doing, but also not just what we were doing, about what we were doing to support the national counterparts. And I'd also bring my national counterparts along and often allow them to speak for what was going on. I'd encourage them to speak because they didn't want to hear it from me necessarily. They wanted to hear it from the national counterparts and me echoing, championing, you know, what was going on and how we were looking to do this in partnership. So in showing that, yes, whilst it was a collaborative space, very much your police, your immigration service are taking the lead for your security, for your well-being. They're the ones dealing with your issues and problems on a daily basis. We're here just to help them do that better. And that was a lot of the messaging that I tried to instill to make sure that we were getting down into that communities levels as well. And it just wasn't about speaking with, you know, the local mayors and those sorts of things when we travelled. It was very much about trying to have the continuum.
Yes,
it might have been going to the schools and just saying hello, or taking out some gifts or those sorts of things that we're able to go on, or just some bottled water or whatever the case might be. So it was trying to make sure that we had a whole of community touch point when we did travel, to make sure that we had as much impact in the time that we had on the ground.
And how did the communities respond?
The communities in many ways loved the UN, I think, because the ability to go back in 2003 and make peace after what had been a real bloody conflict over many years, and then the fact that they were able to retain peace very quickly really, I think, created an environment where there was an environment of trust that we were there to provide an umbrella of peace, stability and security across the country. And so, if you like, the UN brand, the UNMIL brand, quickly resonated across communities that we weren't there to take, we were there to help. And as part of that, over time, maturing it so that Liberians could be responsible for that same stability, that same security, that they would be professional in relation to the delivery of rule of law, and that conflict that started was a thing of the past.
That's really good to hear, and I'm always interested to hear about the communities. I think that's, like you mentioned, that's where where you have the greatest impact.
And that's the barometer really as to what is really going on. You know, often people will tell you things are all working well, but when you start speaking with communities, you really get a sense of, well, what is the issues for you in your community? Well, you know, it's, you know, it might be, you know, our kids are being exploited. It might be that, you know, we can't get to school, or, you know, you really start to understand the challenges that families are having in just trying to, you know, as we all are, just trying to make ends meet each day and make sure that, you know, when we put our head on a pillow, and some of them didn't even have pillows, but, you know, when we put our head on our pillow of the night, that we're okay, we've had food and we've got shelter and we've got love, and that we've got hope. Mm. And I think that's what the UN brought, was a sense of hope, and that there was a sense of a future for many of them where before perhaps that hadn't been the case.
Yeah. So a little bit of a change of tact after that about the preparation for your role in Liberia. Did you identify any knowledge, training or education gaps before you took on your role?
It would have been nice to have been able to do that. By the time everything was arranged and everything had been dotted and I got my passport, I had 3 weeks before I deployed. And that was over Christmas, New Year.
Oh, yeah.
So when we talked about preparation, I was fortunate enough to go to the Police Commissioners Conference in New York in the November of 2013. So I got a little insight in a week of what might be the case. I got to speak with a number of key areas in headquarters about what their expectations were of me, as even though I hadn't accepted the role at that stage. There was, we want the Aussie to make sure that you're across there. It's time for change, and we want to see, Greg, you leading a lot of that change. So I felt a little ill-equipped, to be frank, but so I did a lot of reading. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anything that I could get my hands on in relation to what was going on in the mission, I had already at that stage started, because I'd met the then Deputy Commissioner in New York, and Caesar from the Philippines started providing a whole lot of materials. And so over Christmas, New Year, I didn't have necessarily a lot of rest and break with my family. It was about reading. And I had 60 hours of travel before I got there as well, so I got to read a lot on my way from Canberra to Monrovia as well. But I also had a degree of confidence that I had a leadership team around me. Mm-hmm. I didn't need to know everything. And so, and whilst I didn't know those individuals, and I didn't know their capacities or competence, I went, you know what, I'm not doing this on my own. That I have confidence that we've got people in the right place, that we have UN professionals as not just as part of the police component, but as part of the broader mission. I'm part of a very senior leadership team. And if I don't know, hopefully I can ask. And seek advice from and guidance from those sorts of things. But also, on the other hand, was also going, Greg, you are the Commissioner. And you need to see a leadership tone very early on as well. And it's not about that I knew everything, but it also meant that I could ask others for advice, but the ultimate decisions would be mine. Mm. So I needed to be very mindful that, you know, yes, while you do ask, the ultimate accountability and responsibility for things within the police component will sit with you. Regardless of whether you got poor advice or otherwise, you need to own it, you need to be accountable for it. And so I did that from the outset as well. So whilst I thought I would need to do a lot of reading and those sorts of things, which I did, because there's a lot of things around our governance, around, you know, rules of engagement and all those fun things that we had to get our protection of civilian strategy,
Mm-hmm.
you know, all that sort of stuff, what our mandates had been and what the mandates are now, all those things were really, really important as background. I guess I really learnt the role once I arrived.
Yeah.
And I learned it very quickly because, you know, there is a constant churn of people coming in and out of the mission. So, you know, people that were with you one day may not be with you the next. So you try to look at your business continuity and your succession planning, but a lot of that's taken away from you because, you know, there's just the constant mission churn and those sorts of things. So it was trying to make sure that I invested a lot early,
Mm-hmm.
so I truly, really did get a good understanding as to the environment, the
Mm-hmm.
setting, the context, so that I was then better placed if we did have to reorientate, if we did have to make change, what that change might look like.
Is there anything, any book or document that was particularly memorable from your reading period?
I think separately in trying to work out, you know, some of the policy and governance, I've had a couple of books beside my bed that have always helped me through, and one of those is around mindsets.
Mm-hmm.
And at times I've always thought that I've had a very open mindset, but over time I've realised perhaps it's a little more closed than I thought. So it's things like that about, you know, looking at your mindsets, particularly for me when faced with adversity. And, you know, they in the book it uses examples like kids and puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
Some kids enjoy puzzles even if they don't get them out. They're saying, well, you know, I was really challenged by that and I really liked being, you know, the fact that I didn't get it out, that's okay, but I really felt that I give it a best shot. And so it was looking at the positive as opposed to I failed because I didn't get it. So I think they're the sorts of things that really resonated for me, that there's not a poor decision. The poor decision is if you don't make a decision. And of course you try and make the decisions that you can on the information that you have at the time and that you've pretty well got informed decision making. And that may continue to evolve. So I think, you know, doing the best you can in the circumstance that you find yourself, and as I say, knowing who that you can reach out to, and just having the ability to say, I don't know, but I'm happy to ask. And showing that, you know, perhaps you are a little bit vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
This perhaps also shows a human side as well, that perhaps breaking down some of those barriers as well with people that you will be working closely with, that you can see that, no, there is someone here that has actually got a bit of a heart and soul, and is also able to ask when they don't know, but also is prepared to listen.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the critical bits as well. It's not just being there, but also making sure that you do consult, that you do engage, that you do listen, so that you actually are a much more informed and better person for a result.
We are heading towards our hour, Greg. I have
Mhm.
2 more questions if you'll let me
Sure.
have a bit
No,
more
by all
time.
means.
How did you distill political and strategic guidance into your leadership vision, roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
Because there is a very much a political dimension in everything we do, and I think a lot of my decision making is across several P's and several R's, and those are things that are like press, policy, politics, people. What's the risk? Is there a resource implication to it? Those sorts of things. So typically when I'm making those complex strategic decisions, they're the things that are out here, if you like, that are coming to you to say, okay, so what does it mean from a political sense? What does it mean from a policy sense? Is this likely to end up in the media? If you were looking at it from an outside and someone was looking at a review, does that stand the test? All those sorts of things. So I think in trying to weave the political, I try to be, and we're meant to be, apolitical. That doesn't mean that the issues are not politicised, because they often are. Even so, the heads of agencies that I work with were political appointees. So, you know, they served at the will and leisure of the president. Not necessarily they were the best people for the job. So in a lot of things I had to do, I had to just remember that's the context in which I operate. It's try not to get drawn in that, just be aware of the environment, if you like, but also then look at ways in trying to, how do you actually then compartmentalise the political aspects of this and then cut to the chase of, well, what is the issue that we're willing to address here? what is the cause, what is the result. So examine those through a different lens and try and leave the political out of that as best you can. Often you can't in relation to some of these decisions. Sometimes you just have to let it play out and hope that there's an opportunity in which you can intervene to reshape, to influence in a different way and perhaps show a broader perspective. And that's what I tried to do at times, particularly when I was dealing with heads of agencies or ministers and those sorts of things, was also looking at timing in relation to these and how you could be deliberate in your interventions to make the difference. So if I coin it with having a leadership hat, of which hat? Not so much the Bono's hats, but so much so is, am I here, am I just listening today? Am I going to be here showing empathy? Is it about decision making? Is it about being an advocate or a champion? Or am I just going to be the devil's advocate? Which hat do I need to wear at any given time depending on the situation? So really going into situations with a situational leadership stance that I was able to then draw on whatever hat I should be wearing at the time, and when I did, be deliberate in that intervention. So if it meant about challenging somebody for what they said, not being aggressive, but being assertive in relation to those sorts of things, by just speaking up, using my police voice, as opposed to just having my conversational voice, because it can mean different things at different times. On that tone, on that expression, you know, your body language, that communication style, you can have the right impact without having to shout or yell or those sorts of things. So trying to, if you like, moderate your behaviours, but when you need to actually have that impact, how you might actually best phrase or best coin or best deliver that as part of a deliberate intention. So these were things that I very much, as part of, you know, my experiences, as part of my police training, as part of my external studies, and trying to bring all those little leadership pieces together and going, okay, what is the best leadership hats that I need to be wearing at any different time, and just trying to be very present as well. So having that mindfulness and be presence to make sure that I wasn't distracted, that I was giving, if I only had 15 minutes with you, that you got my 15 minutes, that I wasn't looking at my phone, that I wasn't worried about my next email, that I gave you the time, I was present with you, and we were dealing with whatever context, circumstance, issue that we had to deal with at that time, that you had me, and I was giving you my 100% attention.
And I think that's tough for, like you mentioned, as soon as you've got a phone next to you, you're like, what, is there something else that's coming through that's more important? But yeah, no, I like that. I think it can be tough to learn as well.
It's a little bit about respect.
Yes.
You know, I grew up as part of my family values. A lot of those was around respect and you know, the common courtesies as well, about, you know, please, thank you, may I, those sorts of things. That was very much my country upbringing, which was instilled in me with a bit of an iron fist. And so, you know, I think some of those things now have resonated when I've been in a position to, if you like, role model those behaviours, those thinking, and those sorts of things. So I try to do that, certainly in my time in Liberia, because people hadn't met an Aussie before. And so, you know, showcasing, if you like, some of the Australian ways was a real privilege to be able to impart some of what happened down under to, you know, to many of our you know, global family across law enforcement, about, you know, one little Aussie in a large policing component can make a difference just because of who we are and what we did and the way we went about it.
Yeah. All right, the final question is, what top 3 lessons would you like to share with future leaders who will work in interagency environments?
Okay, 3 lessons. I think for me, the top lessons would be, when you first go in, do a stock take, do your benchmarking, understand where you're at. So that environmental scan, if you like, so you have an understanding for your setting. 2 is then devise your plan, but have a strategic plan. and take some time to formulate that. And then 3, stick to it, communicate it, champion it, and make sure that you haven't lost your people in the process. You need to make sure that you have created a sense of ownership and buy-in to the plan, that you've got fellowship in relation to that, and that you've brought your people along the journey as well. If you don't have a unification of direction and focus, you won't, as we've always said, it's the collective, it's not the individual that has the impact. So if you can bring everyone along that journey and be there with them on the ride, and I guess, if I had a fourth, it'd be just role modelling that as well. Take that leadership role and just role model what you need to achieve, because you can make a difference. It all starts with one.
If I may, I did an interview last week with Major General Chris Field. He had 27 lessons.
I'm sure I could go on, but I think in trying to keep them, really concise about those sorts of things. I also, in speaking to my wife before I deployed, she said, "Greg, you may have to change who you are. You may need to be much stricter, And I went, "I'm not going to change who I am." So I think that was another thing about this as well. And I have always had a mantra around what we do is important. It doesn't make us important. And so I think for me that was, and whilst that was hard in times, because I can remember if I didn't have a large delegation as a police commissioner, I wasn't an important person, because I could go to functions by myself. I could find the chair I needed to sit in by myself. But I also needed to remember that I'm in a UN setting, that I'm working with national counterparts, and at times I had to have a delegation so that they saw me as important, and that would be reciprocal respect, and that I shouldn't undermine that they've got a delegation of 10 to help them get around the floor, where I could do it on my own. So I also had to understand the situation. So I think that's the other thing as well, is appreciate the context that you're operating in. Simple things. I wasn't allowed into the lift first. Sorry, I had to go into the lift first. I couldn't hold the lift open for someone else because I was the police commissioner. If I went to a function and it was for the police, I had to eat first. No one else would eat until I started eating. I should be the first to leave so that they could have some fun, and the police commissioner wasn't there as well. So there was a lot of things that I had to learn that was incumbent in my role, and that there was expectations around what that role meant at times that was in contrary to how I had been brought up as well, about holding a lift open, holding a door open, carrying my own stuff, all those sorts of things. I had to remember that there was people there to support me, and I needed to make sure that I helped them in their role, in them helping me to do my role. So, I had to rethink some of the things that were out of context for me in Australian setting, but very much in play when I was in Liberia. And my wife was very quick to bring me back to ground whenever we reconnected in somewhere in the world about my place in that relationship as well. So I think they were very much, understand that, and also, stay in your lane as best you could. We very much about making sure the blue and the green were separated over there, but across the 3 mission components we worked as an integrated mission, but we very much had lanes that we should stay in, and making sure that we stuck to those as best we could. So
thank you. I do close with any other points that you'd like to share for the project, or more broadly about your leadership experiences.
Look, it's an awesome experience to have an opportunity to work in some of these roles and in some of these environments where they're almost a career highlight. Things about, I got to speak at the UN Security Council twice. I would never dream of doing that growing up. So there were some experiences here that you just never knew that would possibly come your way. So I think, be open to those opportunities, make the most of those opportunities, and really look at ways in which you can advocate shape, influence and promote change wherever you can. And I think to an opportunity to represent Australia, your agency in another setting, is just a tremendous privilege and honour to be able to do.
Thank you very much, Greg. I can't thank you enough. Like you mentioned, there's been some strong themes come out, and you've noticed that I've jotted a few things down. We do obviously have the recording, but I like to take a few notes to help me with my thinking towards the products at the end of this. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it.